Mr. Stubbe, what any religious tradition ascribes as God's will is no concern of this Congress.
Is your right to practice your faith the way you see fit. And they put in their legislation, no, you can't.
The so-called Equality Act is really it's not about giving rights. This is about taking away rights.
In his wisdom, God intentionally made each individual uniquely either male or female.
Welcome back to another Shark Show. Today, we need to make sure that our local government officials are solid and ready to fight either state or federal government because it is coming.
It is, Mike, and with the Democrats in control of all three branches in D.C., I think over the next 2 years, just based on the last 2 months, we have a lot of stuff coming down the pike that should be real concerning for everybody that is anywhere moderate or conservative.
And when you have that initial clip of Rep. Jerry Nadler out of New York saying God's will is no concern in Congress, here we go. Democrats taking God out of everything. And if we lose God out of everything, the people are lost.
And that comes back to the basic principle that this nation was built on, our religious freedoms.
Yeah, and call me crazy, I think there needs to be more God in government, not less God in government.
You're not crazy at all. And I tell you what, for Christians, all three of us are Christians up here. The best part about this is in the end, we win, right. So our God is strong, our God is great. But, we've got to make sure that most people out here understand what's going on with their lives, whether it's with abortion or religious liberties. And this is a perfect example to look at your local officials and see where they stand when something like this bill, H.R. 5, which passed out of the House, out of Congress, and is fixing to go to the Senate. If this passes, what is the state and what are your local officials going to do?
Yeah, and equality, we're all for equality, right? It sounds like it's a great idea, just like everything else they try to push through. But when you look into the meat of this, it's not really about equality. It's about taking away religious freedoms. It
is. And let's listen to Representative Jim Jordan explain in the beginning how this is going.
Or provide a basis for challenging the application of this bill. They put it in the bill. You can't use the standard set forth in RFRA that was passed and that Mr. Nadler, you can't even use that as a defense. It's spelled out in the legislation. As my colleague from Louisiana said, the very first right mentioned in the very first amendment to the Constitution, in the very first amendment of the Bill of Rights, is your right to practice your faith the way you see fit. And they put in their legislation, no, you can't. No, you can't. That's what's in the bill. That's why they didn't want a hearing, as previous speakers said, because they didn't want us to be able to talk about this in a hearing where you have testimony, witnesses. They didn't want that. They come to the floor, and as my colleague from Texas said, give this a fancy name, while they're taking away American citizens' most fundamental liberty, the liberty the founders chose to mention the very first right in the Bill of Rights. That's why we oppose this legislation.
And what a beautiful job that Representative Jim Jordan does from Ohio. And he spells it out right there. He talks about RFRA, which is on page 25 of this bill, section 1107 under claims. And RFRA was passed in 1993, meaning the Religious Freedom Restoration Act. And what this bill is going to do is if you have a claim under this bill saying, hey, look, our church, the church I go to, believes that there are two genders, male, female. Sorry, there's no more claim anymore. You can't believe that, or you'll be in trouble for believing that. So it's an anti-religious freedom bill.
Right. Basically, your religious beliefs no longer matter. This bill tells you what you are allowed or not allowed to believe.
Mike, correct me if I'm wrong here. That bill takes away the legal protections for pastors that get up there and preach on, hey, transgenderism is a sin. Everyone sins different, but transgenderism is a sin. Those pastors would now be subject to being sued, right?
It looks like under this bill it would, because it's taking the claim away that the RFRA Act in 1993 put in to protect the pastors. So, you're looking at a bill that now all of a sudden the Democrats and the government's coming in and saying, hey, look, you can't believe this way, and if you do, we're going to force you to try and believe another way.
It's insanity.
It is. And not only Jim Jordan does an excellent job, but so does, Representative Louis Gohmert from Texas. He comes up and speaks, and they're very passionate about this because, folks, this is the beginning of the destruction, or I should say the continuation, but this is the complete downhill slide of what's going on with religious liberties.
Yeah, this basically opens up a loophole for them to cram anything they want to down our throats.
Yeah, and that's not just for Christians either. This affects, Muslims and Jews and, all kinds of other religions too.
So what this bill, the so-called Equality Act, is really about, it's not about giving rights. This is about taking away rights. You got the rights. But this is saying that part of the First Amendment, Congress shall make no law respecting an establishment of religion or prohibiting the free exercise thereof, that's got to go. And just like my friend read from page 25, the Religious Freedom Restoration Act of 1993, that's got to go. You can no longer, after this bill, you can no longer use that as a defense. When we sue your church, we sue you, a preacher, male or female, it doesn't matter. We're coming after you. If we sue a rabbi, you can't hide behind the First Amendment or this Religious Freedom Restoration Act. It won't help you because we're saying you don't have those rights the Constitution gave you. That's all RFRA was to begin with. It was just codifying what was in the Constitution.
So Louis Gohmert does an excellent job, and he just, looks at it as, hey, it's in the Constitution. The 1993 RFRA Act just basically affirmed what was already in the Constitution. Not that we should have anything to affirm it because it's in the Constitution, but the way things are in D.C. and even, the state of Texas, we still have to codify these things, unfortunately.
Yeah, unfortunately, it's pretty black and white in the Constitution. That's all right. That's all right. There should be no discrepancy there.
Yeah, and it's crazy, Mike. I think a lot of government officials at every level have forgotten the role of government. They're here to protect our God-given rights. They're not here to take them away, and that's from the first, the second, the fourth, all of it. They are here to protect our rights, and time again, we see them just coming right after them.
And, a perfect example we go back to is, the pandemic here in the state of Texas, where our own Governor Abbott did a lot of emergency orders, and, they were unconstitutional.
Absolutely.
A lot of them were. And then you have so that's our state level. Then on a local level, you have our own judge and part of our commissioner court, except for Dave Eagle, voting, and get this, we're talking about religious liberties, voting to take away your right to assemble at church for 13 days in March of 2020. And that's not the right of government.
Yeah, and that was even before Abbott closed the churches. Before Abbott closed the churches, Judge Massengill in the Commissioner's Court closed the churches.
So this is how it affects both federal, state, and your local level. So we need all of our elected officials on each level of government to be prepared, because the citizens are going to start asking questions like this when our rights start to be taken away.
Yeah, and make no mistake about it, they will seek out smaller towns and conservative states where they can come and we've seen it before, where they come here just to set a precedent to get that legal standing here. So where are our local officials going to stand? They've got to stand up. They've got to have a backbone, and they have to start protecting our rights.
Mike, it's important that our current guys stand up, but it's also important that candidates make known that, hey, I will stand up for your right to assemble. I will stand up for your right to practice your religion. On the school board, I will make sure we don't have 18-year-old boys competing in high school girls basketball. It is up to our candidates that are getting ready to run to replace some of these guys that in the last few years have shown us that they will not stand when it matters the most.
And that's right. Courtney even alluded to, the small towns and the Republican states, conservative states. In 2015, we had that one man, one woman, marriage is between that. It's in the, Texas Constitution. Of course, it's in the Bible of all things, right? And they came here. You know, CNN, the whole works came here. And what did our commissioner court do back then?
Folded like a cheap suit,
They
Mike.
sure did. And Representative Greg Steube from Florida does an excellent job in his testimony.
Deuteronomy 22:5 states, "A woman must not wear men's clothing, nor a man wear women's clothing, for the Lord your God detests anyone who does this." Now, this verse isn't concerned about clothing styles, but with people determining their own sexual identities. It's not clothing or personal style that offends God, but rather the use of one's appearance to act out or take on a sexual identity different from the one biologically assigned by God at birth. In his wisdom, God intentionally made each individual uniquely either male or female. When men or women claim to be able to choose their own sexual identity, they are making a statement that God did not know what he was doing when he created them. I'm going to quote directly from Dr. Tony Evans' commentary Bible on this passage of Scripture. Men and women equally share in bearing the image of God, but he has designed them to be distinct from and complementary toward one another. The gender confusion that exists in our culture today is a clear rejection of God's good design. Whenever a nation's laws no longer reflect the standards of God, that nation is in rebellion against him and will inevitably bear the consequences.
Gentlemen will suspend. The House will be in order. Gentlemen may continue.
I'm going to read that line again. Whenever a nation's laws no longer reflect the standards of God, that nation is in rebellion against him and will inevitably bear the consequences. And I think we are seeing the consequences of rejecting God here in our country today. And this bill speaks directly against what is laid out in Scripture. Our government, through this bill, is going to redefine what a woman is and what a man is. It can be anyone who identifies in that gender at any time. You're going to single-handedly end women's sports and all of the gains for women's rights contained in Title IX that was passed in this body since 1972. Single-handedly destroying women's sports in the name of equality. How ironic.
Mr. Steube, what any religious tradition ascribes as God's will is no concern of this Congress.
What a great testimony by Representative Greg Steube of Florida. You know, speaking of, hey, these are the consequences of rejecting God in our society. Pretty much spells it right out.
You know, Mike, I think our country right now is suffering the consequences of rejecting God and furthering this rejection of God for the last, what do you want to say, 50, 60 years? And hopefully the Senate, it's about 50-50 in there right now. Hopefully they do not pass this horrendous bill. But in the event that they do, hopefully our elected officials will do everything they can to stop this from happening.
Right, from the state level to the county level, every single level of government should be a buffer for the citizens to protect their rights.
And also he brought up an interesting point about women's rights. I mean, women had to fight quite a bit just to have their place in sports. And now the rug is being pulled out from underneath them. It's completely being demolished now.
And I hope to see the feminists come out and say, hey, we don't like this because y'all are taking these trans females, aka males, and letting them dominate women's sports. Do you think the feminists would just be outraged by this?
And again, Nate, this goes way beyond, males in women's sports, and it goes to the degradation of society as we see it, and how, it stopped being you can believe what you believe, I believe what I believe. Now they're telling people you have to believe this way. It goes against God's law, plain and simple.
Yeah, it basically persecutes people in their right to believe what they believe, the freedom of religion, if it doesn't align with what this bill says.
Like we've been saying, Mike, this is a horrendous piece of legislation that's already passed the House up in D.C. We really need these local, state, and any other government officials to come out and try to do everything within their power. And sometimes that means pushing some limits, what they think they can do to reject this.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, we knew this was coming. This is no surprise. So it falls on our local leadership to protect our fundamental rights. And they've got to step up to the plate and do their job.
The First Amendment is under attack. The Second Amendment is under attack. Folks, we need to wake up and see what's coming down the pipe, and we need to stop it, and we need to either force our elected officials to stop it and get new elected officials if they don't.
Guys, I'm sure a lot of you watching, probably most of you, y'all are concerned just the same way we are. We need to get the word out of what's coming down, and we need to get a word out because we're trying to offer a solution to have these local guys step up. Guys, please like, share, subscribe on Facebook, YouTube. If you're sending links to your grandma on an email, that's fine too. Thanks.
And once again, our First Amendment in this bill is under attack. Our Second Amendment has been under attack and will continue to be. And we need the people to step up. We need the churches to step up and take back control of our rights, our First and Second Amendment rights. And please get with your elected officials and say it stops, and it stops right now. And here with Blue Shark, we're shining the light on local elected officials, state elected officials, and now, our federal elected officials. And we're just here to speak the truth, shine the light, and say, do your job. Shark Show out.